Hey everyone, I'm Ellison Mars. You're watching NBC News Now. The Senate getting to work on COVID relief, taking up the $1.9 trillion bill today. In a win for moderate Democrats, the White House agreeing to cut off stimulus checks for individuals who make more than $80,000 a year and couples who earn more than $160,000. President Biden meeting virtually with House Democrats today. The White House once again asking Congress to act fast to help the American people.
I talked to the president about this morning. He's pleased with the progress that is being made on the rescue plan. What he has been firm on is that the package needs to be large enough to meet the scope of the twin crises we're facing, COVID and the economic downturn.
The White House also monitoring a rocket attack on a base housing U.S. troops in Iraq. A contractor died from a heart attack while sheltering at that base. No other troops were hurt. We'll have more on that attack later this hour. We start today with a flurry of activity on Capitol Hill. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell is there. Leanne, let's start with COVID relief. The Senate bill will now cut off direct payments at $80,000 for individual filers, $160,000 for couples. What else do we need to know about this deal and how this is going over with progressives?
Yeah. Hey, Allison. So this was an attempt to appease moderates who had concerns about the direct stimulus payments and other parts of the legislation. They wanted it more targeted, not to benefit really so many people, they say, who don't necessarily need these direct stimulus checks. So what they are going to do, the same number of people, you're still going to get a full stimulus check like you did last time if you made up to $150,000 per couple, $75,000 per person, but it's going to cap out much, much sooner. And so that is where the change comes in. And so fewer people are going to get stimulus checks at that higher income level as the deal that has been reached as of today. Of course, things could still change. In response to that, though, the unemployment insurance extension of $400 a week, something else that moderates wanted to change to $300 a week, that is not going to change. That is going to stay the same. But again, like I said, there's still many steps to go and things could still be changed throughout this process. But where we stand right now, there seems to be buy-in from Senate Democrats and President Biden on changing the targeting of those direct stimulus checks. Allison.
Leanne, minimum wage might not be in the bill, but it is still a hot topic. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell talking about that on the floor today. What is he saying, and what kind of fight do you expect from Senate Republicans on this one?
It's interesting. Republicans are actually in a very difficult position on this minimum wage. They're trying to determine if they want to be the party of Trump, if that includes his populist message, which would include a higher minimum wage, or not. And those two things don't always square with each other. Republicans had come out against the minimum wage, especially at $15 an hour, most of them anyway. But Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, he seemed to indicate that there was some openness at compromise for a minimum wage proposal and putting it on Democrats for refusing to compromise. Let's play what he said on the Senate floor. We'll talk about it on the other side.
Senator Sanders' far-left minimum wage policy that would have killed 1.4 million jobs just as we try to recover, that appears to be gone too, at least for now. The Democrats had a choice. They chose to go it alone, tack to the left, leave families' top priorities on the cutting room floor.
McConnell, though, did not say that there had really not been any willingness from Republicans to negotiate or compromise on the minimum wage at all. But the story is not over. We could see amendments over the next coming days to try to change the COVID relief bill by offering a minimum wage amendment. They're expected to fail, but the issue is not anywhere near dead. Allison.
Leanne, let's talk about the Capitol riot hearings in the Senate. The commanding general of D.C.'s National Guard testifying about how long it took to get troops to the Capitol. Here he is talking about a frantic call from the former chief of Capitol Police. Take a listen.
Chief's son, his voice cracking with emotion, indicated that there was a dire emergency at the Capitol, and he requested the immediate assistance of as many available National Guardsmen that I could muster. The approval for Chief Son's request would eventually come from the acting Secretary of Defense and be relayed to me by Army senior leaders at 5:08 p.m., about 3 hours and 19 minutes later.
Leanne, it took more than 3 hours for that request to get approved. What are you hearing from the Senate on that one?
Yeah, well, senators are incredulous, very frustrated with that. They're still trying, they had many questions about that specifically today. One of the things that frustrated the senators is that the official from the Department of Defense who finally approved the release of the National Guard to come to the Capitol, the official who actually made that decision was not the person testifying today. They sent someone else. So there's, even though there's a little bit more clarity into what happened, there's still so many more questions as to why it took the Department of Defense so long to approve the National Guard to the Capitol. Allison.
Leanne, the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI sending a joint bulletin today. They are warning that domestic groups have, quote, discussed plans to take control of the U.S. Capitol and remove Democratic lawmakers on or about March 4th, which is tomorrow. What's the word on the Hill about this alert? Are lawmakers concerned?
Well, this is a similar alert to what lawmakers got earlier this week from the Capitol security. It looks like law enforcement officials are trying to do their due diligence to be as open and transparent as possible about potential, I want to say potential threats against the Capitol and lawmakers themselves. There does not seem to be a widespread concern up here. We are still operating and working essentially on a military base with a very secure perimeter of fencing and barbed wire, and the National Guard is still here. But this is a much different posture of communicating these potential threats than what happened in the lead up to January 6th, Allison.
Leanne, the House expected to vote and pass a sweeping voting rights bill called the For the People Act today. What are its chances in the Senate?
Well, this is a major voting access bill, and it will need 10 Republicans, in the Senate. It needs 60 votes. So the chances of it passing in the Senate are relatively slim. But this bill is coming at a time where Republican state legislatures around the country are trying to roll back access to voting. So it is just showing the dichotomy between the two parties in the aftermath of a very contentious election with a lot of conspiracy theories being thrown around. Allison.
All right, Leanne, we said it was a flurry of activity on Capitol Hill today, and it certainly is. Thank you so much for taking us through everything that is going on there.
Of course. Today and every day, Allison.
President Biden criticizing Texas and Mississippi's governors for ending the mask mandates in their states. Take a listen.
I think it's a big mistake. Look, I hope everybody's realized by now, these masks make a difference. We are on the cusp of being able to fundamentally change the nature of this disease because of the way in which we're able to get vaccines in people's arms. We've been able to move that all the way up to the end of May to have enough for every American, to get every adult American to get a shot. And the last thing we need is the Neanderthal thinking that in the meantime, everything's fine, take off your mask, forget it. It still matters.
NBC News White House correspondent Jeff Bennett joining me now. Jeff, the president not sugarcoating how he feels about those governors' decisions. What else did he say today?
Yeah, and this has been a real escalation in rhetoric from the White House, because earlier today we heard from the administration's health officials who basically said that now is not the time for local leaders to take their foot off the gas. And, there is the prospect of widespread vaccinations this summer, but you heard the president say that to lift mask mandates right now is Neanderthal thinking. We have all just lived through year one of this pandemic. And the thing that has really made the difference in a lot of states and localities in turning the tide is the wearing of masks, is the social distancing, washing hands, all of the things that the CDC and other public health officials have been talking about for a year. But now, for political reasons, you have the elected leadership of Texas and Mississippi basically saying that, we have arrived at a point where the pandemic is functionally over. And of course, we know that's not the case. And so that's one of the reasons why you heard that really direct rhetoric from the president today, Alice.
Jeff, let's talk COVID relief. Now that President Biden's agreed to lower the cutoff for the stimulus checks, does the White House think that this bill is going to move through the Senate with fewer hangups or perhaps even a little more quickly?
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, one of the reasons, the primary reason why the president signed off on this is because that was the desire of moderate Democrats. And because Democrats are using this fast track process to pass COVID relief with just Democratic votes alone, since Republicans basically said that they weren't going to support it, the president and the White House generally can't afford to lose any Democrat. And so the view among some moderates was that the $1,400 checks is fine, but let's at least tailor it. And so now an individual who earns more than $80,000 won't see a check. And then couples earning more than $160,000 won't see the check either. And so the deadline is the same as it's ever been. March 14th, that's the day that the federal extended unemployment benefits run out. And so the hope is that the Senate passes this quickly. And then because there's a change, it has to go back to the House. The House will then pass it. And then it'll go to President Biden's desk. And again, the goal is to get this all said and done by March 14th.
Just a little ping-ponging around until then. Jeff, the White House withdrawing Neera Tanden's OMB nomination without waiting to hear from Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, who would have been the deciding vote. Why did the administration decide to back down here? And what's the latest on Tanden's potential replacement?
Yeah, and there's some mixed reporting here because a couple of outlets have written that she actually did signal her intention to vote no, so that the White House was in some way aware. And then there are those she says herself that she did not tell the White House of her intentions. And so the question then becomes, was there a Democrat? Was there a potential Bernie Sanders or a Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona who was set to vote no that we just don't know about publicly? Either way, it became untenable, and it looked as if she wasn't going to get confirmed. And I had been told early on that the only way for the president to basically withdraw her nomination would have been for Neera Tanden to withdraw her name from consideration herself. And that's essentially what happened. She withdrew her name from consideration. The president accepted it. But we're in a situation now where the deputy OMB director, a woman named Shalonda Young, she's a known quantity in D.C. politics. She worked for Democratic House staffers. And she just had her first confirmation hearing yesterday, and she drew wide praise from Democrats and Republican senators. Republican senators who, by the way, had not very nice things to say about Neera Tanden. I'm thinking of Joe Kennedy from Louisiana and Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. They both spoke very highly of her. And Shalonda Young, we should say, is also the choice of the Congressional Black Caucus. And now also Hill Democratic leadership. They're getting behind her as well. So it looks as if she does become the nominee, and right now all signals are pointing to the fact that she will be, that she would be easily confirmed, Allison.
Jeff, President Biden was briefed today on the rocket attack at a military base in western Iraq. It was hosting U.S. troops. What is the White House saying about that attack?
Well, right now, the administration is saying that they're not going to take any hasty action here. And White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was actually asked about this today by my colleague Peter Alexander. Here's a bit more of what she had to say.
We responded to recent Iranian-backed attacks on coalition and U.S. forces in a manner that was calculated, proportionate, and fully covered by legal authorities. That will be our model moving forward. If we assess a further response is warranted, we will take action again in a manner and time of our choosing, and we reserve that option. The president was briefed by his national security team this morning, was, of course, monitoring the details overnight. What we won't do is make a hasty or ill-informed decision that further escalates the decision or plays into the hands of our adversaries.
And so far, U.S. officials say they do not yet know who carried out the attack, and no group so far has claimed responsibility, Allison.
All right, Jeff Bennett with the latest from the White House. Thank you so much.
Sure.
10 rockets fired at that Iraqi military base hosting U.S.-led coalition troops earlier this morning. The deadly attack happening just 2 days before the Pope is supposed to visit Iraq. NBC News global chief correspondent Bill Neely has more.
Hi, Alison. Another attack, another provocation, almost certainly by Iranian-backed militias. The base hit this morning is home to hundreds of U.S. troops. It's been visited by President Trump and President Bush. Today's attack is another new challenge for President Biden. This morning's target was this U.S. coalition military base in western Iraq, which has been hit before. This video, released by the Pentagon Monday, is of 16 missile strikes on the base last year. They injured dozens of U.S. troops. A coalition spokesman tweeting 10 rockets hit the Al-Assad base around 7:20 this morning Iraqi time. Iraq's Shiite militias, backed by Iran, have stepped up attacks on the US-led coalition recently, firing missiles at an airport base in Iraq last month that killed a contractor and injured a US soldier. In retaliation for that attack, President Biden ordered his first airstrikes against the militias and issued this warning to Iran.
You can't act with impunity. Be careful.
For the Iranian-backed militias, this is the man they seek to avenge. Qasem Soleimani, leader of Iran's elite Quds force, killed in an airstrike last year ordered by President Trump. He took action after militias launched repeated attacks on US troops. Today, Iran may be testing the resolve of President Biden, provoking him, even after he signaled he'll talk to Iran about a nuclear deal. And this morning's attack comes just 2 days before Pope Francis is due to become the first pope to visit Iraq. He asked people this morning to pray for the success of a visit to areas once controlled by ISIS that is fraught with danger. A threat that for US troops in Iraq is daily and deadly. Well, the White House is aware of this attack and is monitoring the situation. The choice for President Biden is, does he retaliate again or simply bide his time? The militias are clearly trying to provoke him to escalate this, and they take their orders as well as their funding and their arms from Iran. So the Middle East already proving to be a very tough and early challenge for Joe Biden. Alison?
NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell joining me now. Andrea, great to have you with us. This rocket attack, the first since the U.S. airstrikes on the Iraq-Syria border last week. What is the Pentagon saying today?
Well, the Pentagon is saying that, of course, they're evaluating it. Obviously, there's concern that Iran is behind this. They are the most likely local actors, Iranian-backed militias. And if necessary, they will respond once they have the attribution. Jen Psaki, as you heard, was saying that it would be proportionate, measured at a time of their choosing. But obviously, this is not a good reaction because it was only last week that the U.S. took what it thought was a proportionate response to the Iranian-backed militias in Syria, very carefully, not in Iraq. And we're hoping that that would be the end of it so that they could then proceed and try to get back to what they really are hoping for, which is diplomatic talks, multilateral talks with our European allies and with Russia and China. So not one-on-one with the U.S. and Iran, but try to do something which is politically challenging to get back into talks with Iran about not just the nuclear compliance that they want to achieve, but also getting missiles and other Iranian misbehavior in the region into part of an overall umbrella, which would be far down the road. But that's going to be a lot harder to do if we're in a tit-for-tat escalating basis right now with Iran.
Yeah. Andrew, this really is a crucial military test for President Biden during his first 100 days in office. He's not even 50 days in. What is at stake for him here on the global stage?
Well, first of all, he's won a lot of, kudos from allies by saying America is back in that first speech that he made to foreign leaders, as well as, of course, the rest of the world, saying that we value alliances. That's something that Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, also emphasized in his big global speech this morning. So saying you're going to work with NATO, you're going to work with the allies, you're not going to do anything unilaterally, that's great as far as they're concerned. In contrast to Donald Trump, you're going to emphasize human rights as we are with China, and you're going to try to reach fair trade. You're going to get back into the Paris Accords and focus in a big way with John Kerry and Gina McCarthy on climate. All that is great. But they're also saying, certainly Macron in France is saying, let's see how this works out, because they've been scared really by what happened in the reaction to the election, in the challenge, and then of course, the insurrection, the riot on Capitol Hill really shook our allies. And they want to make sure that this is not just a one-off, that, let's say, after Joe Biden, another Donald Trump comes back. And so there has been a real, not a chilling, but also a concern, I would say, among allies that they no longer really trust the U.S. to be the leader of the world, always, in the WHO on all fronts, leading the way. That they have not seen in the last 4 years. And they want to know, was Donald Trump just, sort of an anomaly, or are there lots of people, 74 million of them in America who voted for him, and 80% of Republicans who still like him, according to all the polling.
Mm-hmm. Andrea, today Secretary of State Blinken delivered his first major foreign policy speech. He addressed military involvement in Libya, Iraq, Syria, and warned against promoting democracy through costly military intervention. Take a listen.
We will not promote democracy through costly military interventions or by attempting to overthrow authoritarian regimes by force. We've tried these tactics in the past. However well-intentioned, they haven't worked. They've given democracy promotion a bad name, and they've lost the confidence of the American people. We'll do things differently.
Andrea, how is the administration planning, as Secretary Blinken puts it, to do things differently?
Well, for one thing, human rights is central to what they're talking about. They are at least talking a good game. The sanctions against Russia, the sanctions against Saudi Arabia, although in each case they didn't go after the principal, they didn't go after MBS, they didn't go after Vladimir Putin, who's harder to reach except through his associates and some of the assets that he has hidden overseas outside of Russia. That said, they are trying to do things more multilaterally. They called out China for the Uyghurs, for what is, they said during confirmation hearings, genocide against the Uyghurs. Their intelligence sharing and their intelligence analysis will be more measured, will not be politicized. So there are a lot of things that they are doing that is a more normal foreign policy, whether it be a Democratic or Republican foreign policy. And it's back to doing things that are more acceptable to the allies. Certainly China is the key thing, though. That is what Secretary Blinken said, that focusing on China as the biggest challenge to the United States above all other challenges, because it's both economic, it's military, it's trade, it's cyber, and certainly human rights. So the focus on Hong Kong and the Uyghurs in that regard, they're not going to ignore human rights the way the Trump administration did. And they're really re-engaging in the international system.
Andrea, we are always so grateful and thankful to have you on News Now. I know it makes for a longer day for you, and we really appreciate it.
Not at all. My pleasure. Good to be with you, Allison.
All right, let's check in with NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She's got the latest headlines from NBCnews.com. Hi, Simone.
Hey, Allison, we are starting with some news from California. That's where investigators from the LA County Sheriff's Department got a warrant to retrieve data from the black box in Tiger Woods' SUV after that serious crash last week that severely injured him. And we also have an update on that SUV crash in California that left at least 13 people dead. Today, the Department of Homeland Security says it's launching an investigation to see if the crash involved a human smuggling operation. And over in Oklahoma, police have caught a man accused of stealing more than $40,000 worth of lottery tickets. Now, police had been looking for 21-year-old Dylan Barrett since January, and they finally found him hiding in the back of a pickup truck. And it's unclear right now if any of the stolen tickets are winning tickets. Well, some history being made. The largest Protestant adoption agency in the U.S., Bethany Christian Services, announcing it will begin serving LGBTQ parents for the first time in its 77-year-old history. A spokesperson for the adoption agency said these days families look a lot different than they did when we started. And Bethany is committed to welcoming and serving all of them. Well, Dolly Parton finally got a dose of her own medicine. The country music icon posted a video of her getting the Moderna vaccine yesterday. Last year, Parton donated $1 million to the company to help fund research and development of its vaccine. Dolly Parton, an American hero. I am so glad that she is at least partially protected right now.
Oh, my God. And hearing her sing Vaccine to Jolene today just made my heart sing. Simone, it's everything.
How did I miss that? I've got to look that up. Oh, my gosh, that's amazing.
You will love Must see. Texas businesses will be back open at 100% a week from today. The state rolling back mask mandates and other COVID restrictions, even though just 7% of Texans are fully vaccinated. And it's not just Texas. Mississippi also lifting its mask mandate starting today. NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky is in Austin.
Yeah, Allison, the last 48 hours has seen significant developments on both the federal and state COVID fronts. You hear President Biden say that by the month of May, two companies, Merck and Johnson & Johnson, should have joined forces and hopefully create enough vaccines so that every American can get vaccinated. That's months ahead of what was initially scheduled. Then you have what's happening here in Texas. You have Texas Governor Greg Abbott announcing yesterday that the statewide mask mandate will no longer be in effect as of next Wednesday. In addition to that, he's saying every business in Texas can now reopen at 100% capacity. And that is something that many businesses here have been waiting a long time to do, the ones that are still open as a result of surviving the pandemic. And yet we still have owners who are hesitant about this because they feel it's too much too soon. Take a listen.
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. We are dying to reopen. We are operating at a much smaller percentage of revenue than we've ever operated here. We want to run this business to its full capacity. We just feel that it's unsafe.
Yeah, I will definitely require my staff to wear masks.
That's that.
Yes, I will, I think, until we get a little bit further down. Now, and I'm going to also recommend that people do wear masks.
Now, one of the big questions about this is whether or not mask wearing is enforceable. The governor did make a point to say that no one can be penalized for not wearing a mask. That's not to say that you can't have policies in place. We know that there are Texas school districts that are still going to require masks for students. But as it relates to an enforcement standpoint in a city or a town, as it stands right now, the governor's order should supersede that. He did give local leaders, though, the ability to go into COVID mitigation efforts should the COVID numbers start trending upward past a certain point. So all eyes will be really the month following when this new policy goes into effect to see what, if any, changes has on the Texas COVID numbers. Allison?
Could children be the latest victims of long-lasting coronavirus symptoms, joining adults as COVID long haulers? Sure looks that way, but even our nation's top doctors still don't know enough. NBC News correspondent Kristen Dahlgren has the latest on these mysterious lingering symptoms, and what parents should watch out for.
From around the world, children listing their COVID symptoms and just how long they've stuck around. One long hauler recently pleading for answers from Dr. Fauci.
My heart races and I can't read or write. No other doctors can help me. Can you help me?
We don't know enough about it, Hudson.
Different than the severe inflammatory syndrome that can affect some children, this is now being called long COVID. Just last week, the NIH launched a $1 billion initiative to investigate. Between 10 and 30% of adults infected with COVID will become long haulers, and early studies hint the impact on children could be just as profound. 15-year-old Chloe has had symptoms since July.
An inability to get a deep breath, fatigue. I get headaches every week. Lots of headaches.
Good job, Chloe. Why certain children are impacted is still a mystery. Baltimore's Kennedy Krieger has opened one of the first clinics dedicated to long COVID children.
These are usually high-functioning, very healthy children who did not have any previous illnesses or medical conditions.
Many just had a mild case of COVID. Long COVID signs for parents to look out for include shortness of breath, fatigue, and dizziness. With no cure, doctors are trying to treat the symptoms. But for many, like Chloe, there is still little relief.
I don't want anyone else to go through this.
Once a straight-A student, she's now barely getting by.
We just want to see our old Chloe back.
An increasing number of families looking for answers as symptoms linger. Kristen Dahlgren, NBC News.
Kristen joins me live now. Kristen, you talked there about the Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore opening a post-COVID clinic dedicated to long-haul COVID children. Tell us more about what they're doing there.
Right, and that shows you just how serious they're taking this, that they're actually opening these clinics. There's also one in Denver dedicated just to children. The problem is, just like long haul adults, there is no cure. And so all they can do at this point is try and treat the symptoms and mitigate them. Chloe's being treated there. So you saw the video of her. They're doing some physical therapy to help with some of the muscle weaknesses that she has. You know, they can try and treat the fatigue. They can try to treat the dizziness. And then they're also obviously looking for why these things are happening. But right now, they just don't have those answers, Allison. And so they're trying to make these kids comfortable, you know, as much as they can. But there's not all that much else they can do. And a lot of them, like Chloe, aren't seeing much relief.
Yeah. Kristen, Dr. Fauci saying there that we just don't know enough about long haul symptoms, whether it's in children or adults. With the work they're doing at the Institute there, the NIH investment in studying these symptoms, when might we get some answers here, or is that still a big question?
Right. And it's a great question. And it's one that everyone wants answers to. The NIH is still designing how it's going to, you know, look into this with that $1 billion. Dr. Fauci said at this point, their best hope, this is all he could say to little Hudson there, was that his body would at some point recalibrate and sort of learn to deal with this immune response to COVID-19. But, you know, that was his best guess at that point. So, you know, we're learning more as we go along, as we have been for the past year with COVID. They're hoping to get answers quickly. I was reading something, and this is really encouraging, that some people with long COVID, some adults who are getting the vaccine, say their symptoms are better after they get the vaccine. So there's a little bit of hope, you know, that maybe the vaccine can help tell the body how to handle these types of symptoms. And so that's one thing that may be helping as we go forward. And then obviously people not getting COVID will stop them from getting this long COVID. And so that's, again, the vaccine, the mask wearing, social distancing, things like that. And not thinking that kids are immune to COVID-19, because while for the most part they aren't impacted as severely as adults, they're clearly seeing some symptoms in some kids, and you just can't tell who that might be.
Yeah, we have learned. We thought at the beginning maybe kids weren't going to get COVID, but we have seen that they certainly are, and now are becoming long haulers. Kristen, thanks so much. It's such important reporting.
Right.
We now have 3 highly effective COVID vaccines, but we're in a race against new, extremely contagious variants. NBC News senior medical correspondent Dr. John Torres live from Colorado's Department of Public Health and Environment State Lab in Denver, where the UK variant was first detected in the U.S. Dr. John, there are 3 foreign variants circulating in the U.S. right now, at least 3 that we know about. How is that lab investigating variants, and what are they finding?
And Allison, you're right. We have those 3 vaccines that we now have approval or authorization for, but we also have those 3 variants. And the concern with those is we know they're more contagious. Are they more dangerous? We're still trying to find that out. But the very first one, the B117, which was out of the UK, was discovered here at this lab, the state lab for Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. They did that back in December. Since then, they have really ramped up their testing here. And the reason they've done that is because even though they have detected more B117, but they have not detected the other variants in Colorado, they think they still might be here, but they're not going to know unless they actually test for them. And so they're doing that on a daily, weekly basis to make sure that they find those variants. And what they're doing is essentially taking samples from around the state of positive COVID tests, and a percentage of those here in the lab they're testing. That way they get an understanding, a survey of what's happening in the state, Allison.
Dr. John, once a variant is detected, who gets that information?
And Allison, that's a great question here. And that's the one I asked the lab director here. And she said when they find a positive variant, they notify the state itself, then they notify the CDC, but they're also working in conjunction with other health departments in other states and at the federal level as well, because the important part is doing a surveillance across the whole country. Once they found that B117 back in December, which again was the first in the country, they realized that community spread was a big issue, and they want to make sure that they get an understanding of where that community spread is so they can keep it under control. And so not only those variants, the 3 we're talking about, spread, but we don't start getting other ones as well, Allison.
Dr. John, patients may never find out if they contracted a variant of this virus. Why is that?
And right now, patients won't know they have a variant unless they're actually positive for the variant here at this lab. And what they do is they notify the provider and the patient, because the patient might need to have more isolation. Instead of the 14 days, they might need to go to 21 or 24 days of isolation. But overall, patients who get tested across the state or across the country for that matter really won't know if they have a variant for a couple reasons. Number one, these are not FDA-approved diagnostic tests. They're laboratory tests. So there's a little legal distinction there. And since they're not diagnostic tests, they can't use them to diagnose anything. And so, again, that's a legal hurdle they're looking at. But on top of that, overall, it doesn't really matter what variant you have. You need to do the same things. You need to make sure that you protect yourself from that and from spreading it to others. And that means the things you and I talk about, Allison, all the time: wearing a mask, social distance, wash your hands, small groups. Those things work for the variants, and they work for the wild virus as well.
Dr. John, COVID testing is going down nationwide. What's going on here? And are you worried about that, especially when it comes to detecting variants? I mean, how do we detect if we're not testing enough?
And that's the big thing. I'm worried about that. And that's the question I specifically asked the lab director here, Dr. Emily Travanti. And here's exactly what she had to say.
If we don't see the samples, we won't see the variants in them. And so we need to make sure that we are seeing a representative number of samples coming into the laboratory.
And so the important thing is making sure that you do the surveillance, because if you're not doing the surveillance, you're not going to find those variants. But on the other side of the coin, if people protect themselves, the virus won't get in their body and the variants won't end up there anyway. So finding them is important, preventing them even more so, Allison.
Dr. John, Dr. Fauci saying today that vaccine makers are working on keeping their vaccines effective. Here he is at today's White House COVID briefing.
The next approach is booster doses of the wild type against the wild type virus, which is exactly what Pfizer has announced a bit ago and what other companies will also be doing, namely talking about a third dose of the original vaccine for those vaccine regimens that were a prime and a boost. And that's going to be given to participants in a phase 1 trial to evaluate safety, tolerability, and immunogenicity.
Dr. John, is a booster effectively a third shot, or in the case of J&J, a second shot, or is there actually a difference here?
And Allison, it completely depends, and it depends on how things progress over the next few months. What they're trying to do is get a jump on it and saying, we know that's out there, we want to make sure we understand it. It could be, if it happens quickly, it's a booster. If it's not for a year or two, I'm sorry, it's a third shot. If it's not for a year or two, it's going to be a booster, Allison.
Got it. Okay. Dr. John, I always learn so much when you're with us. Thank you so very much. And it's great to see you outdoors. It looks beautiful there.
I know. And just so people know, nobody around me for at least 25, 30 feet. So very well protected.
Oh, I know that for sure. If there was someone probably within 10 to 15, I know you'd have a mask on. Dr. John, always staying safe. Thank you so much. Georgia's voting laws could be changing. The Republican-led state legislature trying to pass 2 bills that would restrict early voting on the weekends, a move the New York Times says would have a big impact on black voters who were key in flipping the state in November. That was the first time the Peach State went blue in a presidential election since 1992. And just 2 months later, 2 Democratic senators won a pair of runoff races in the state. Times Magazine chief national correspondent, NBC News contributor Mark Leibovich joins now. Mark, great to have you with us. Georgia's legislature passed 1 bill on voting access this week. The Senate, state Senate that is, could soon pass another. Tell us what will change if these bills become law and how they'll impact, in particular, Georgia's black voters.
Well, I mean, the preliminaries are that something is going to change, and it looks like if this legislation passes the Senate, which it will, and depending on whether the Republican Governor Brian Kemp signs the bill, voting will become much more restrictive. I mean, we don't know what the final bill is going to look like either in the Senate or whatever the governor signs, but it's likely that this is going to happen probably within the next few weeks. There's going to be a bunch of court challenges. Stacey Abrams' organization, Fair Fight, will, I'm sure, be very active in that. So this is one of those things that is a sort of slow-moving, evolution of the voting laws, but clearly it's trending in a direction that's very, very worrisome to a lot of Democrats and Republicans. They would accuse Republicans of trying to make it more difficult to vote because they can't persuade their changing demographic at the ballot box.
So what are you hearing from voters in the state about these bills?
Well, I mean, it sort of depends who the voters are. I mean, Georgia is a microcosm of, in some ways, the rest of the country. I mean, it has become kind of the most closely watched battleground state in the country, partly because it was so hotly contested last time. It was really probably the highest profile state to flip from red to blue. Joe Biden was the first Democratic presidential nominee to win Georgia since 1992. There was also a very high profile Senate runoff in the weeks after November 3rd. So, I mean, there's been a lot of focus on Georgia, but also Georgia is changing really fast demographically, politically, and the voting rights, history of that state is extremely fraught, and it's also very dynamic. I mean, a lot of laws have changed very fast and could change again very fast. So, I mean, again, there's just a lot of energy going on down there on both sides, and we'll see, obviously, how it plays out.
Georgia isn't the only state trying to pass new voting laws. According to the Brennan Center this year, 253 bills have been introduced to restrict voting access across the country. This week, we know the Supreme Court is hearing an Arizona case that tests the power of the Voting Rights Act. In yesterday's oral arguments, an attorney for the Arizona Republican Party said voting restrictions would help the GOP. Listen to this.
What's the interest of the Arizona RNC here in keeping, say, the out-of-precinct ballot disqualification rules on the books?
Because it puts us at a competitive disadvantage relative to Democrats. Politics is a zero-sum game.
Mark, how does that statement reflect what's happening, what we're seeing across the country?
Well, I mean, this is one of those classic examples of someone speaking the truth, and because it's actually potentially very damning of their argument. I mean, a lot of people paid attention to it. I mean, this is sort of a classic case of a gaffe in politics is someone speaking the truth, maybe not not on purpose, but essentially, yeah. I mean, the competitive disadvantage piece of this is the usually unspoken part of the argument, which is when more new voters register, we have seen traditionally, especially in minority populations and young voters, Democrats tend to do better. I think Georgia is a classic case of that. Arizona has also been a classic case of that. And it's in the very sort of zero-sum interests of Republicans to sort of thwart, the ease with which new voters can register to vote. And I mean, that's sort of what's playing out here. It's not usually spoken of so bluntly, but I think one of the reasons that statement got as much attention as it did is because it sort of lays out the whole game for all to see.
Mark, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your insights and the Vancouver Canucks banner. That's terrific.
Thank you, Allison. Good to be here.
I now understand that I acted in a way that made people feel uncomfortable. It was unintentional, and I truly and deeply apologize for it. I feel awful about it, and frankly, I am embarrassed by it.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo getting emotional at his press conference today, addressing the sexual harassment allegations against him in his first briefing since 3 women accused him of unwanted advances. NBC News correspondent Ann Thompson joining me now. And the state's attorney general independently reviewing these allegations. But Cuomo said today that he wanted New Yorkers to hear from him directly. What else did the governor say about this investigation and the calls, quite frankly, for him to step down?
Well, he said he wouldn't step down, Allison, and he is clearly pinning all his hopes on this investigation to exonerate him. He did apologize today, but again, he tried to urge New Yorkers to not jump to conclusions, to, as he said, wait for the facts and wait for the independent investigation. Let's hear from the governor.
As you probably know, the Attorney General is doing an independent review, and I will fully cooperate with that review. This is what I want you to know, and I want you to know this from me directly. I never touched anyone inappropriately. I never touched anyone inappropriately. I never knew at the time that I was making anyone feel uncomfortable.
And the governor acknowledged that it really isn't about his intent or how he felt, but it's much more about how those young women felt. Allison?
And Governor Cuomo's third accuser says that he made unwanted advances at a wedding in 2019, putting his hands on her face and asking to kiss her. How did the governor address that?
Well, and that was a very interesting question because, as you know, Anna Rook, who is the woman who is making that accusation, gave a picture to the New York Times that shows the governor grabbing each side of her face, and she has this terrified look on her face as he does it. And he just said, "That's the way I am," basically. Here is the governor in his own words.
You can go find hundreds of pictures of me kissing people, men, women. It is my usual and customary way of greeting. You know that because you've watched me for, let's just say, more years than we care to remember. By the way, it was my father's way of greeting people. You're the governor of the state. You want people to feel comfortable. You want to reach out to them.
But this is 2021, and as we have all learned, there is a right way and a wrong way to greet people. What was interesting is the governor said he had been through sexual harassment training. Allison?
All right, and we know that an independent review will be happening. We'll see what the results are. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's a Marine boot camp like no other. 60 female recruits, the very first to go through basic training alongside the men, and it's happening at a 100-year-old training area in San Diego. NBC News correspondent Megan Fitzgerald takes us inside Marine Corps history in the making.
They're the few, the proud, the female Marine recruits, supporting one another as they're pushed to the limits physically.
Run! Say something, girl! Run!
And emotionally. This boot camp is history in the making. It's the first time men and women have gone through basic training together here at the Marine Corps Depot in San Diego.
The question has been asked before, why did it take so long? Why is it, happening now after 100 years? Well, I think the conditions are exactly right for it right now.
18-year-old Anaya Allen, determined to prove she belongs.
Did you ever second guess yourself because you were a woman?
No, ma'am. I just put forth double or quadruple the amount of effort that I see my male counterparts can bring to the table. And ever since then, I've been rewarded for my hard work.
Drill Sergeant Amber Starosik did her training in South Carolina at Parris Island, separately from her male peers. She never thought this day would come.
This is an opportunity for me, sure, but this is an opportunity for the future generation of Marines, not just females, but also males, just the Marine Corps in general. It opens up a lot of doors.
Get your hands off!
There's a misconception, even among some in the Marine Corps, that women go through different training than men. Not true, say these young women. The standards have always been the same.
The males are going to know, hey, the females, our sisters that we train alongside, they did the same thing as us. They earned the same title. They're one of us. It's not male or female, it's Marine.
Senior officers say including women from day one benefits all Marines.
And what's the advantage in that?
Speed. The advantage is speed of decision, in that the quicker our younger leaders are capable of developing the solution, the better it's going to be in terms of tactical advantage against the enemy.
The goal is to fully integrate Marine basic training across the country by 2028. There is no quota. Today, women make up just around 9% of the Marine Corps.
Scream!
A force known for toughness and traditions that each new group must carry on.
I hope to come out a stronger person, have more pride in every step I take, walk straighter, talk louder, and just smile more and being confident in the person that I've become.
You're a part of history.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you feel about that?
I feel great about it, ma'am. I finally get to give my family something to be proud of.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.